no doubt what took place in number 10 was wrong.
Was it a good party though?
I was never at any of those events, and you sort of think, how can this happen? The darkest day was...
Oh, I know the answer. Managing Boris Johnson.
No. That was relatively straightforward in the sense that that is the toughest thing in both business and in government. And Boris banged the table and said, we put everything in now, but we're going to try everything we can to stop Putin from this aggression. It's why I say he's the most consequential prime minister of his generation. If anyone says, why did you do that? I don't think there was corruption. I think it was naivety. We know what we're doing, right? And I called my wife to say, you know, we're about to lock the nation down. Thousands of people. And that is when I was really frightened. I thought, how are we going to tell these people we're going to change their life completely? Is this the end?
Nadhim Zahawi, welcome to Secret Leaders.
Thank you for having me.
Most welcome. So most people watching will know you as a Conservative MP, Chancellor of the Exchequer, the man behind the vaccine rollout. But, you know, for us, and we're a business show, we're also so interested in the fact that you built a company, YouGov, that has, as I Googled earlier, an annual revenue of 250 million. So, you know, what's new with you? What are you doing now?
Yeah, where'd you go from there?
Yeah, I was very lucky in many ways. So I was a unique type of politician in the sense that I initially entered politics in the 90s in local government in Wandsworth, then stopped doing politics, founded YouGov, took it public in 2005, stayed on it for a further 5 years, so 10 years in total as chief exec, running it in the public markets, taking it to the United States of America, which was our big break.
Right.
What made YouGov a unicorn was going to America and growing in America. I'm loving life. I'm now chairman of Very Group, which is actually the old Great Universal Gus catalogue business and Littlewoods catalogue business combined. We've got about 4 million customers. We sell them about 1.7 billion pounds worth of goods. So we sell everything other than books and groceries, but you know, everything from sports apparel to toys to electronics and white goods. It's a great business, genuinely a great business. It's got amazing heritage, over 100 years of heritage, pure online now, but with an amazing financial service element. So the pure online players in the fashion world will probably net about 5.4% margin. Our margins are close to sort of 13.5% margin because our customer actually has an account with us. They're able to borrow that little bit extra to buy the things that they want to buy and then pay over time. And it's an incredibly successful business. And I'm very lucky to be chairman of it.
And that was all before you joined, so really the pressure's on.
Yeah, exactly right. That's very true. Very, very true. I mean, I love businesses where I think I can make a big contribution. I think I can. In this case, we've got an amazing team, CEO, CFO, finance director, and actually a great COO. I said to him, many decades ago, it's in the book, there's a whole chapter about, I think it's called Pete and Johnny, where I worked with Peter Dubens and Jonathan Seif, selling initially sort of Hard Rock Cafe t-shirts, then changing color t-shirts, supplying everybody on the high street from M&S to Tesco's, Littlewoods catalogue at the time. In fact, when I became chairman, they found an old docket with my signature on it, where I, basically they bought some licensed children's wear from us.
A little full circle moment.
It is. I mean, but what was fascinating about the business is I initially sort of went to have a look at the fulfillment centre. We've got this incredible place called Skygate in the East Midlands. And it wasn't the robots, which was high-tech, latest robotics. I spent about £250 million building this incredible fulfillment centre. I asked our really super talented COO, what's your secret here? Because you've clearly done something unique compared to the rest of the market, because your fulfillment is as competitive as Amazon's. He said, look, Nadhim, I designed the whole thing. He said, I went around the whole world. We went to South Korea. We had a look at Japan, the US. We designed the whole fulfillment center, for our 4.4 million customers, based on a simple principle, and that is my biggest supplier into the fulfillment center is the returns department, because online, people will order 3 shirts
crazy.
and will send 2 back.
Absolutely.
If I can't reprocess
My
them,
wife.
but everybody does, right? If you think about it, if I can't reprocess them in a few hours and get them out to the next customer in a day, then my inventory control, my stock control is blown apart, and that is terrible for any retailer, as you know. And so it's an exciting business, genuinely exciting business, and I'm really delighted to chair it and chair such a strong team of leaders.
In the book, which was great, by the way, super
Thank you.
engaging. I mean, it's a very colourful life, right? I've done lots of things, so it was always going to be good. You talk a lot about risk taking.
Yeah.
It's an essential ingredient for entrepreneurship, obviously.
And government.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where would you relate, your understanding and appetite for risk in business and risk in government?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I try and address in the book, a couple of things. One is to try and demystify politics, because I hope some of your listeners, after a great business career, to think about going to public service. I would, and we can talk about sort of the ups and downs of my career, including my painful exit, ultimately after becoming chairman of the Conservative Party and leaving cabinet over my issues with HMRC. But with all of that said, it's the best career decision I've ever made to go into public service after YouGov. We all strive to be a footnote in history, and I think being able to say, look, I delivered the vaccine program for the United Kingdom, where we got to just shy of 1 million doses a day from a standing start, no infrastructure, to build that whole thing was I think a remarkable achievement for the team that we put together, and an amazing team to lead. But to your very good question, so in business, you hold risk daily. You make decisions every day. You're bombarded with information, and you've got to very quickly decide what information is material to the decisions you have to make today and this week, what you can sort of park for a week and then return to it and look at it next week, and what is just noise that you need to just block out, because if you don't block it out, you're going to lose focus.
That must be a very good skill in politics.
It's a great skill in politics, and I think part of that is because I trained as an engineer. I'm a chemical engineer from University College London, but actually there's another skill which is really important, which is holding risk. Right, in business, you sort of think about what are the trade-offs almost every day in your business, and actually what are you comfortable holding risk, whether it's supplying a client and giving them credit, right, or taking a risk on a big order where you haven't sold it yet, right? And that is a skill that I think sometimes can be lacking in government, lacking in politicians, because the background of most politicians is not business or engineering. It tends to be either special advisors, a number of very talented lawyers, lots of different backgrounds, but few entrepreneurs in many ways. And let me try and bring it to life for you from an example. So at the early days of the pandemic, the NHS thought that actually the biggest challenge to the system, to the NHS, so that it doesn't break, was we needed more intubation. So we need to effectively build ventilators, because we saw what was happening in Italy as the pandemic took hold. People didn't have ventilation and were dying because they couldn't get them intubated, as the medical term is. And so the Prime Minister put out a challenge to British industry. We had everyone on the call. We had about 65 industrialists on the call. James Dyson, Ford, Airbus, everybody was on the call, and Boris Johnson said, your country needs you. We've got to produce these ventilators, not in 6 months. We don't have 6 months. We've got 12 weeks at best. Otherwise, the NHS will break in the way the Italian health system had broken. And to his credit, people like James Dyson said, look, I'll try and design one quickly and build it.
Yeah. And you don't want that to be the story where it's like, it only took 5,325 goes.
Right. So then I'm the junior minister on the call who does the sweeper role, right? So almost like my COO now, right? Yeah. After the call, I have to be the one then trying to operationalize some of this stuff and decide who do we back, how do we back it, what support do they need from government, right, from the machine. I walk into the Department for Business, and we have a brilliant man called Dick Elsey. We've knighted him. He's now Sir Dick Elsey, who's an engineer who headed up the high-value manufacturing catapults for us around the country. This is pre-COVID. who was waiting for me, and I could see he was concerned. Walks into my office. He says, "Minister, we're never going to build these ventilators if we try and build them from scratch. You know, I love what James Dyce is trying to do, and it's great." And I said, "Explain to me why." He said, "Well, because if you build them from scratch, you're going to have to go through the regulatory approval." Rightly so, because what you don't want is to build a machine that then chokes someone or kills someone, right? This is life or death here. And I said, "Dick, you sound like you've got a solution for me. Right? You haven't just come with a problem." He said, "Yes, I do, Nadhim. I think we can do this. There are two designs, one by Smith Industries, one by a small company in Oxfordshire, that if we talk to the companies and allow us to use their designs, we could bring them together with Ford and with Airbus. So couple their designs with big manufacturing capacity, and we can ramp up. And that way we don't need to go through the regulatory approval, which would take months to get through anyway." Now, I could have easily said, "Look, that's too much risk for me. I need to go to tender because actually, you know, we want to tender this." Actually, having an expert like Dick Elsey made me comfortable enough to say to my team, "Go." Right, I made the decision right there and there. I said, "Right, go. What do you need from me for your approval? Where do I need to sign as the minister in charge?" Because I know I can defend it at the dispatch box in Parliament. If anyone says, "Why did you do that?" I say, "Here's why I did it." Right, I had no time. I had 12 weeks to save lives. And actually, we've got two approved designs. We've got one of the best engineers recommending this. And we've got Airbus and Ford ready to put their whole production muscle behind this for the nation.
How much of those decisions, by the way, are based on an intuition of understanding this is the timeline and practicality, therefore it has to be done in a certain way, and also understanding how you're able to post-rationalize it and defend it if it doesn't go well?
So that's exactly right. So it's part of, I think, every businessman or woman, entrepreneur's strength DNA is to calculate risk, right? And the ones that do it well become incredibly successful. The byproduct is financial success, but actually build some great businesses, right? And I think the combination of me being an engineer, probably having a failure and then a success with YouGov, failure with Alan Hinckley Limited, which we can talk about. Every entrepreneur, anyone who tells you that they've had success throughout their whole life is either naive or lying.
Or maybe not that successful, right? Because actually the failures are a great pathway for what you can learn to be more successful.
Absolutely right. And I think the point I'm trying to make is that I was comfortable holding risk because I had an expert in the way we did with Kate Bingham, who we brought in, whose was her day job was investing in different teams in life sciences, right, in new medicines. And we brought her in to say, right, there is over 100 teams telling us they're going to make a vaccine, right? Who are we going to basically bet on and how are we going to option those bets and contract with them early so that we'd have the most successful vaccination program in Europe, if not in the world. And we did that well. Where did we do it badly? On PPE. When you go back to the pandemic, and I think the inquiry will ultimately say this, is when we initially were hit by the pandemic and the system needed more masks and gowns and everything else in hospitals, in care homes, we didn't think of bringing in a Justin King. Now, hindsight is a wonderful thing, but if that had been my remit, I was in a different department then. I was only brought in once we needed the vaccine to be deployed. I would have asked Justin King, right, to come in and say, right, the next 6 months of your life are mine, in the way we did with Kate Bingham. And she did it for free, by the way. She didn't charge anything for it. You are very comfortable bringing thousands of products into your supermarkets on time, on budget, every single minute, hour, day. You're going to do the same for me by sourcing PPE from around the world. That human being is an expert, right? Justin would have had a system for it. Instead, I don't think there was corruption. I think it was naivety that politicians thought, right? They told every ambassador around the world, right, get hold of your contact list, start finding out.
Now, what were the major mistakes of PPE?
So I think that's the biggest mistake is the perception publicly that somehow people are being corrupt, right? By the way they're deciding who should get a contract for PPE. One, people forget that the whole world was
Yeah.
at the time competing for this product, right? We were hearing stories of agencies, secret agencies from around the world, boarding airplanes in Asia with duffel bags of cash and commandeering the flights to go to their country versus the ultimate owner or the where it needed to go. So the mistake is, I think, not bringing in an expert so that you're comfortable holding risk.
It's
right?
interesting, isn't it? Because you always take a very different approach on experts to Michael Gove. So you got that like interesting dichotomy on the value of expertise.
I think you're being slightly unfair to Mike. I don't think he's misquoted and much maligned on this. I think he would agree with me that actually it makes a huge difference. The difficulty for him at the time, for Matt Hancock, is everything was moving so fast.
Yeah.
And hindsight is a wonderful thing. But I would say, if you're asking me what the mistake was, I think some of the early mistakes is people driven by wanting to move fast and get the stuff in, didn't think about, okay, how do we build an infrastructure to cope and get this stuff in a sustainable way, in a way that is systematic and avoids abuse. Because clearly there must have been abuse. People, and it'll come out probably in courts and in the inquiry, there was some people who behaved badly, who decided that actually the pandemic was a good time to try and make money rather than do the right thing. And that was the weakness in the system.
It's frustrating, obviously, because it feels like the perfect micro but then became macro example of the downfall of the Conservative Party from a narrative point of view, because then everyone's looking for another example that is the same thing again, the narrative of the greed, the in club, you're either in or you're not, and that has just infested the whole public perception, hasn't it, of the entire party from what was a single moment in time, like you say, quite a hard one to judge because it's a global crisis. What's interesting, and obviously something for you to be proud of, whether it's correlation or your own brilliance, who knows, you are absolutely the person behind the part that people really respect. It was really, rare for British people to not complain about something, to be honest. Yeah. But absolutely, the COVID rollout was one of the only things everyone's like, oh, well, so they did pretty fucking well there, let's be honest.
And I think your business experience is probably like such a defining part of that skill, because we have seen so many hundreds of founders, good ideas and can't scale. And it's the ability to understand how to scale something that I think...
That is the toughest thing in both business and in government.
And to your point, why Justin King would have been the perfect example.
The toughest thing is to scale. After completing the
0 to 1,
the vaccine, 0 to 100 miles an hour, get the system up and running, right? I was then promoted and made Secretary of State for Education, and we were doing some really great things in education. You see it now in the way our kids are, moving up the league tables for literacy and numeracy. But again, you see lots of examples. T-levels, right? A great piece of innovation by a sort of Labour minister. It was Lord Sainsbury. One of the first things he did when I became Secretary of State was reach out to me and say, look, can I talk to you? And he showed me the whole T-level program, which was in my department, and he convinced me that actually this is really well thought through, really well designed, and what we should be focusing on is scaling it. I didn't care who invented it. One of the strengths I remember growing up, with Ronald Reagan is actually the real success is you don't have to be the inventor of it. I'll take good ideas from anywhere as long as I can scale them. It's hard. The reason is, again, I say to you, I was lucky with YouGov in that I found a business model. We built a mousetrap better than anyone else's that we could scale. It's hard to scale, right? Most of your listeners today who are running businesses, their biggest challenge is they look at their little business and think, God, this is brilliant. If only I could get it to the next 1,000 customers and the 10,000th and the millionth customer, and then people could see how good this thing is. But it's hard. It's really, and it's hard in government, right? It's much easier, by the way, to do lots of pilots. So the way, one of the real weaknesses of government is the churn, the change. Right now,
people.
It's a strength because actually democracy is important. You know, I fled a country where there was no democracy. But what happens is a new minister comes in, rather than saying, actually, I'm not proud. Show me all the good ideas. Show me the evidence. If it's a good idea invented by a different government, let's just adopt it and scale it. That was my attitude.
But it is too political, right?
Yeah, but that's my. Sadly, some ministers don't behave that way. If it's not invented by them or by their party, they'll want to just cut it, right? And so what happens is the civil service, the DNA of the civil service is to serve the minister, right? And we'll try initially politely to say, actually, minister, this is quite a good thing. Look at it properly, blah, blah, blah. But if the minister's adamant, they get their way. So then they have to start all over again with another pilot. So there's, there's a sort of proliferation. Yeah, exactly. I still have to improve my English after all these years. Of pilots everywhere and little scale.
The skill of an entrepreneur, I think, at scale, is the ability to almost do nothing and allow other people to do everything and just be a very, very good decision maker and, guide on the mission. And I think that for what you did, that must have been the defining skill.
Totally.
We're all marching in this direction. This is the goal we're going for. You must all deliver on your different piece. And that's where most entrepreneurs fail, I think, in my opinion.
I felt that probably one of the most important parts of my job as vaccine deployment minister was just to protect my team. I had a great team. I went to NHS headquarters to kick the tires. There's a brilliant lady called Emily Lawson, one of the real unsung heroes of the vaccine deployment. She had a brilliant team with her. We embedded our army into the deployment team, and again, really strong leadership there as well. And what I really needed to do was just protect them from both, number 10, which was nervous, cabinet office, which is nervous, and kept pulling them into more meetings to go through yet another presentation of, have you got everything right? Are you ready? So that when the first doses arrive, we're going to be able to scale quickly. And I just had to make sure that people sort of almost just held back. We had an incredible private-public partnership. So we brought in Palantir to give us Foundry, the technology, so I can see literally almost in real time who's being vaccinated. We brought in DHL to deliver what I call my pizza boxes to the front line, to the GPs who'd come together, 5 or 6 together in an area to decide, who does the support bit for the current patient that they need to look after, as well as then deploy vaccine. So it was we worked with local government, we worked with the Scottish government, the Welsh Labour government, the mayors Sadiq Khan and Andy Burnham and Andy Street in Birmingham. But I felt my biggest challenge was just to tell everyone, just calm down. We know what we're doing, right? Just give us a chance. We will demonstrate for you. And that's what we did. Week in, week out, as we ramped up the numbers, people began to have faith. And that's why the program was so successful.
Over the last decade, Chris and I have started over a dozen businesses. It's not something we're particularly proud of, by the way, but it means we've had a lot of exposure to different business banks. You try one, you're not so happy, try another, you're not so happy. The cycle goes on. By this point, between us, we were laughing, but we tried them all. There was one we actually hadn't, and it's because they're newer, and we weren't really familiar with the fact that they had this option. So we wanted to try that based on our own knowledge and compare it. And I tell you what, it is head and shoulders above, and we are thrilled to be using and partnering with Wise Business.
Basically, Wise Business is the only account you need to get paid, pay employees and suppliers, and manage your business's money in multiple currencies.
Exactly. With Wise, you can do business across the world, pay, get paid, and manage your business's international money with ease.
And look, here's the thing. You actually save money as you grow. No hidden fees, no sneaky markups on exchange rates, and no ongoing subscription costs. It's like finding money in your pocket that you didn't know was there.
But my favorite part, and this is crucial, it's just so damn easy to use. I know, because I'm the one who set it up for this company.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you're lazy. I was never going to get you to do it. But anyway, you can make payments in as little as a few seconds, and it integrates with all your business software.
You can easily withdraw funds from Amazon, Stripe, and more in multiple currencies. And it connects to accounting softwares like Xero and QuickBooks. But damn, what about security?
Well, as you know, every time you try and log in and take money out of the account without checking with us first, the security is amazing. They've got two-factor authentication, a 24/7 customer support team, and a fraud team working around the clock to keep Chris off our money. I could go on about all of the amazing features, but seriously, when you're a small company or even just starting one, there's already so much going on that having a payment service that's quick, easy, and, by the way, most importantly, reliable is just an absolute necessity. And for that reason, we use Wise. If you want to get on board, it's simple. Just head to wise.com/business to learn more about how Wise could work for your business. Coming back to your point about, you hope that successful entrepreneurs, the people that listen to this show, consider public service and a life in business. A life in government. Obviously, one of the big reasons people aren't attracted to government and don't go into government is you get a lot of criticism, a lot of flack from everyone. It's really badly paid. It's just not set up for career ambitious enthusiasts. And I watched this really interesting clip the other day from Tony Blair, actually, and he was talking about, his greatest admiration is Singapore and the founding story of Singapore. And apparently in Singapore, no one can be paid any more than the people in government. So the highest paid people there, as a rule, are all the people who work in government. And so if you work in business, that's the second best. Obviously, there are going to be exceptions for CEOs, founders, etc., but that's the general rule. And so the brightest, smartest people will go work in government in Singapore. It does seem like a very smart solution. I know not everything's about money, but it's really difficult when the narrative to someone starting in business is, it's all on you, you're going to fail, you've got to figure it out. But the payoff at the end is, it can be glorious and you'll learn so much, everything else. The narrative of going into government really is the most toxic stuff. I see how people talk about you, about Boris, about Michael. No one basically lasts long enough anyway to not become the talking point or negativity. And just, is it worth it?
Yeah, so why are entrepreneurs going into politics?
Yeah.
I do worry. I genuinely worry. I tell you for why. That, I don't want us to end up in a place where the only people who go into Parliament, and Parliament is the sort of the talent pool from which we select our cabinet, right? That's our system. That's how it works in our country, is that whichever party has a majority in Parliament gets to form the front bench, the government, right? And the Prime Minister, the leader of that party, has to choose his ministers from Parliament. Now, he can promote people into the House of Lords and bring them in as ministers, but that's the system we have. Right, so the talent pool is from those 650 odd people who will put their name forward and will work, burning, shoe leather to get elected. That's a really important process, right? Democracy is important. Again, I go back to Saddam. He said, you do not want to live in a country where you give that up because you end up with a Saddam Hussein. But, and this is, genuinely a concern for me, what you don't want is end up in a place where either the people who are putting their name forward are people who would never be able to, in any real economy, command the salary of a current MP,
or people you wouldn't hire,
or you wouldn't hire them, or people who just happen to be very rich or marry well, right, or inherit wealth, because there's a huge talent pool in between, right, of people who may be leaders in education, in schools, in colleges, in universities, in business, in all sorts of walks of life, but who will look at that and go, do you know what? One, I don't want the grief, right? The stuff that your family gets put through, that you get put through, the gotcha moment in the media, and they think actually, I can do better anyway in the private sector. That's my big concern. And you look at, actually, you mentioned Singapore. Singapore do it really well. What they do, and I met them very early on, we had a sort of several meetings with ministerial meetings, is they peg the salary of their prime minister and the cabinet to the salary of a CEO of their public companies. So I can't remember the exact numbers, but something like 3/4 of the salary of the average of a CEO of a public company. But, and here's the rub, right? The prime minister has to deliver their strategy, and they actually go on television, by the way, and do 2 hours, 2.5 hours of presentation to the nation of what their strategy is for health, for house building, welfare, economic growth, everything, right? And people watch this stuff, and I wanted to do the same. We built this incredible studio at the cost of 2.7 million quid. I kept saying to Boris, every week post-pandemic, the nation got used to seeing Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance deliver data, right? We should have a minister stand up and say, here's my strategy over the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months, and here's why we're doing it post-pandemic. And I think it'll make a real difference, because the first few presentations, you'll get the shock horror headline saying, oh, look at this number, it's terrible. But once you teach people, once you treat them like grown-ups, then they behave differently towards you and towards the politics.
And you're providing two-way accountability.
Right. And you see other countries doing really clever things with attracting talent. In the UAE, for example, if you're a minister, you make minister grade, I think after serving 3 years, I can't remember, 3 or 4 years, you keep your pension for life. A really, really high pension as well, which again, I think is a great incentive to say to people, come and serve for 3-4 years, right? You're not going to lose out. In fact, you'll do well as well.
It's the Warren Buffett thing, right? Show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. Our incentives are terrible in the UK for government.
And that's my fear, is if you end up with that what I call the sort of the large mid-level talent, right, of really good people not entering the political process. I think it'll be a much weaker parliament and actually much more susceptible to making mistakes or doing things badly.
There is a caveat, I guess, which is Liz Truss. Good incentive. She gets her prime ministerial pension.
Does she get the pension?
She gets pension forever, no?
Yeah, I mean, once you make prime minister,
it's not bad.
Yeah, but you got to be PM, then you.
Yeah, no, I get it, but not for that long. Not for that long, so it's okay.
But just coming back to the book, so after you worked on Jeffrey Archer's campaign,
yes,
you end up having a business meeting in a greasy spoon.
That's right.
And tell us that
not
story.
far from here.
Yeah, so where was
Barbican.
That? What were you talking about?
Yeah. So Stephen Shakespeare, who was my wonderful fellow traveller during the campaign. He was the only salaried member of the Jeffrey Archer for Mayor of London campaign. Stephen was chief of staff. All the rest of us were volunteers. And when I look back now, I think there were sort of young conservative activists around that table. It was Priti Patel, myself, Tobias Elwood, Shailesh Vara, who else? Sajid Javid, Robert Halfon, right? All ended up in Parliament pretty much, and pretty much all, bar maybe one or two, end up in cabinet. It was Jeffrey was a remarkable scout for talent and genuinely colourblind. So when his campaign collapsed, Stefan was out of work. Yep. We all went back to. I was probably the highest paid marketing director in the land. I loved working with him. It's very rare that you meet a human being who is genuinely capable of original thought. Most of us will sort of pull ideas together. There's an engineering term called kludging, right? You kludge lots of ideas, right, to come up with something that hopefully becomes a success. Stefan is the opposite. He will come up with something completely original. And we sat in a greasy spoon near his home in the Barbican. I said, I loved working with you for a good couple of years, being activists and trying to get this man to be mayor of London. We should be able to do something together. And if we've got a good idea, let's make it happen. One of the ideas we had for Jeffrey, remember, I mean, this is a different world. You guys are much younger than I am, and will probably not remember this. But
we've still read Jeffrey Archer books.
Yeah, you did. No, but no, I'm talking about something slightly different.
No, I know.
It was the days of America Online, right? Dial-up connections, right? There was no surveys online.
Just caught that.
This was literally, free serve was the probably the most important thing that had happened in tech in the UK with a portal. So when you buy your PC from Currys or PC World, you got this disc with it which loaded up as free serve, and I think Yahoo was probably the biggest at the time.
Well, this was an idea for.
So the idea was that if Jeffrey was going to be mayor of London, we were going to call it London Gov, and the mayor would say to Londoners, two things. One, you're going to pay your taxes online because everyone paid taxes by writing a check, literally with a checkbook and sending it in, or going to their bank and transferring money. So online payments, and you would then ask people their views as to how they want their money spent. So, romantic idea of, Boston Tea Party, no taxation without representation, i.e. if I'm going to pay my taxes to London, I want to know how they're going to be spent. How much is he going to spend on improving the roads, rail, whatever it happens to be. Anyway, once the campaign blew up, there was no campaign, and so when we sat in the greasy spoon,
out of jobs.
He's out of job. I was still I was European marketing director for Smith and Brooks, a very successful business. Anyway, we came up with the idea of, well, why don't we do this commercially? Now that he's not going to be mayor, let's try and see if we can build a business where people pay their taxes in London and then get to tell their government how they want the money spent. And then I said to Stephen, well, why are we restricting our ambitions to just London? Right? This could be for the whole country. In fact, it could be for the whole world. So I came up with the name YouGov, and it's an amalgamation of two words, you and govern, i.e., it's consumer democracy, right? The internet, this thing that's going to network us all together, is going to shift the equilibrium in favor of we the people, right? Boston Tea Party, no taxation without representation, right? Away from the executive being either government or big corporates. So we're going to be able to tell big corporates and government, actually, collectively, we want you to do this or that or the other. And that's the idea of YouGov.
So what was product one then?
I was going to tell you, very painful.
And for all the entrepreneurs listening, did you make money early? Were you profitable early?
No.
Did you raise money? I want to know a little bit about it.
We had an amazing guy called Neil Bruscott, God bless his soul. He passed away sadly from cancer, who had built, again, an incredible business by finding a gap and filling it. So he was a luggage manufacturer in the UK, and on a train journey selling to a client, he got this magazine and he was flicking through it, and he saw that in America, luggage manufacturers were beginning to make a piece of luggage to carry this thing called a laptop, right? And so he built a company called, I think, Targus, to effectively fill the gap when people were just beginning to move away from PC towards laptops, and sold it to his American rival for hundreds of millions. Anyway, he gave us our seed funding.
Do you remember the amount?
I think it was about 300,000.
And
then my father helped us a little bit as well, which part of the reason I had a problem at the end with HMRC and leaving government.
It goes back to that.
It goes back to the YouGov.
Funded.
But my dad did both. He put a little bit of funding in, and basically, I had just come out of a failure of, terrible business experience.
Yeah.
And I really used them as my crutch to help me, build the early sort of corporate strategy for YouGov. We began by trying to convince local authorities that we can build a tax payment system for them. So I was going around the country trying to convince all these local authorities that, give us the access to your legacy system. We'll build this thing.
But that was tough.
Oh my God, was it tough? It was pretty hard graft. I managed to get one out of, I think, something like over 60 presentations.
I've sold to local authorities.
Really
brutal.
Brutal. Right. Anyway, Wyre Forest District Council gave us a go. We very quickly worked out that the money we'd raised will just disappear in 5 minutes trying to build this stuff.
Yeah.
Because you had Capita and EDS, all these giants beginning to build tax payment systems. But what worked for us was the asking people where they want their money spent, the public opinion bit. And so we very quickly pivoted. And again, entrepreneurs, if they're smart, they very quickly pivot.
You go
and
don't try money is.
Exactly. Don't, sometimes you get so emotionally attached to an idea that you can't see that this thing is just not going to work. We very quickly dropped the tax payment investment, told Wyre Forest we're really sorry, we can't build this thing for them. But we focused on building a panel that is broadly representative of the adult population, and then the computers will pull a subsample of that, that would be much closely representative of the adult population, and then be able to ask them questions and move basically the ability to poll people from telephone or clipboard to online. And that's the story of YouGov. And the real break we got was when we went to see Stanley Calms, who had obviously
Dixon's?
Absolutely right. So PC World
good
Dixon's,
knowledge,
exactly
Dan.
right. And of course
Impressed myself.
was the then owner of FreeServe, because FreeServe was the idea of his store manager in Manchester, a guy called Ajaz Ahmed, who'd come up with the idea of FreeServe. And we went to see him, and he said, you've got 5 minutes, you pair of jokers, to pitch me. We pitched him the idea of YouGov being this engine for public opinion. 45 minutes later, we're still in his office in Mayfair.
Good sign.
We must be doing something right. And he brings Ajaz up. About an hour and 45 minutes into this, we're now talking terms about how we're going to be the news engine for FreeServe. So when you clicked on news on FreeServe, it went to YouGov servers. And what we did was we built this thing called interactive news. So we hired young graduates from journalism school 24/7 to cull the news every day, 24/7. But most importantly, every news story had either sort of 3 or 6 questions below it that the reader would have to answer to tell us their opinion about the news story.
Fascinating.
To get people used to interacting with online surveys. And then we thought, how do we broaden the panel? So we hired a bunch of talent for more money. So it was Faye Weldon, because she had a particular type of readership, who's an author. One John Humphreys, one Boris Johnson, Ian Hargreaves, Peter Kellner. And they had to deliver an article for us each, I think about on a once a month basis. Again, the condition is they have to ask questions of their readers. And that was part of sort of the way we built the panel for YouGov. And I guess where the real break came through is when the Telegraph, funnily enough, they had an amazing psephologist called Professor Anthony King. And Anthony King was then using Gallup and I think NOP as their pollsters for the Telegraph. And after the general election of 2001, where we demonstrated how accurate this stuff can be, he gave us a chance and said, look, we won't give you the whole contract, but we're gonna contract with you for a survey, maybe once a month, I think it was at the time. But once the industry accepted the methodology, then everything else fell into place, i.e. it's a no-brainer. It's faster, deeper, and much, much more affordable to do it online. And so we were the sort of online pioneers.
Amazing. Dan and I have started over a dozen companies between us, so we know how this goes. You're starting up, you're scaling, ideas are flowing, you're making plans, and you're really getting caught up in the bigger picture. This is when the fine details can find themselves overlooked. I'm talking about security and compliance.
Now, before you roll your eyes and reach for that skip button, hear us out. This isn't your grandpa's boring lecturer on following rules. This is about building trust, and in the digital world, trust is the new currency. Here's the thing. You don't have to go through this nightmare if you use Vanta.
Vanta is like having a compliance guru, a risk management wizard, and a trust-building ninja all rolled into one sleek AI-powered package. They automate the hell out of compliance for SOC 2 and ISO 27001. Say it with me.
ISO 27001.
All jokes aside, I've experienced this myself with my company Lottie. We weren't allowed to pitch one of the biggest companies in the country because we didn't have our ISO 27001 certification in place. And so this is a serious thing.
If only you'd have had Vanta, mate. Vanta doesn't just tick boxes, it builds trust. And in business, trust is everything. That's why Chris couldn't get that deal through. It's the difference between a prospect saying, maybe later, and shut up and take my money. With Vanta, you're not just complying, you're showing the world you've got your stuff together. Over 8,000 companies already use Vanta. Whether you're a scrappy startup or you're scaling, Vanta's got your back.
Now I know what you're thinking. This sounds great, but I bet it costs an arm and a leg. Well, if you head over to vanta.com/secret leaders right now, you'll get $1,000 off. So give Vanta a shot and join the ranks of businesses that are building trust faster than you can say SOC 2 compliance. Trust me, your future self and your stress levels will thank you.
What was your biggest challenge building that business? Like, what was the darkest day?
The darkest day was...
Oh, I know the answer. Yeah. Managing Boris Johnson.
No. That was relatively straightforward in the sense that yes, he
the
was
first time, when it was a YouGov, maybe, yeah.
Come back
the second time.
Stop it. But the toughest challenge was not, invoicing anyone for about 18 months. Right? Imagine going to work every day and you're just watching these pounds just go out the door because all these, we've got these young journalists working 24/7. We're trying to run the business. We're trying to tell people, by the way, this stuff, look at the data. It's amazing. And everyone going, yeah, it really looks interesting. I'll give you a call later. We'll still use the Maury or someone else or.
Can you remember how confident you were that it was going to succeed at the time?
I was deeply concerned. The real confidence came. I'll tell you where the confidence came. I talked about the 2001 general election. So we had this young man called Joe Twyman, who's a friend of Stefan's, who's another great psophologist. And there is an academic study that goes around the world, the democratic world. And in our country, it's called the British Election Study. And there's the American Election Study, Australian Election Study, and so on. And it's done by the best academics in the world of polling, of psephology. And they do it at every general election. That occurs in these democracies, and then they write a big paper afterwards, and what they do is they commission pollsters to give them their data, and you had to provide the raw data, not just the models that you predict the outcome with, the actual underlying data, the raw data beneath it. And Joe managed to get us a meeting with them pre the 2001 election. They said, this is really interesting what you're doing. We want to include you in the British election study. We're doing the face-to-face and telephone with, I think it was ICM and one of the other pollsters, Maury or NOP or Gallup. Anyway, you'll be the only online guys to do this. The condition is you have to give us your raw data because we have to analyze the raw data as well. And by the way, we've allocated all the funds to the other companies.
Just what every CEO wants to hear.
It's a big academic, right? And that's where my my heart fell. I'm like, I just thought we were going to make some money, but we were drowning then, and we were the challenger brand, right? Yeah. I thought, what? Let's at least go out with a bang.
Right? How much runway did you have at the time?
Oh, next to nothing. I mean, we were just like living.
So
hand
then,
to
what
mouth.
happened? So how did you get out of that?
So we kept going. We gave them the raw data, and they wrote the study up, and we wiped the floor with the others. Much more accurate than the others on the outcome of the 2001 general election, and that was our real breakthrough. I.e., the academic world then started taking notice of us. Anthony King took notice of us, said to the Telegraph management, "Look, I'd like to give them a go. This is really interesting, and we think the world is shifting towards these guys." We were so desperate, back-to-back desperation. I took YouGov to ICM, Nick Sparrow, a good man, to be fair to him, who was at the time one of our biggest pollsters, but telephone-based, ICM Research. And I said, look, buy the company for £1, right, and we'll come and work for you. Let me show you some of this data, right, because it's worth saving. And he wrote a letter back to me. I should actually try and find it and frame it, saying, Nadhim, thank you for coming, and I got huge respect and time for you and Stefan and the team and Joe Twyman. But I put it to my board, and we don't think that online research will ever play a major part in opinion research.
And just to be clear, what was the highest valuation that you guys achieved?
I think we got to about 1.35 billion.
Yeah.
Wow. Amazing.
So it just shows the smartest people can be blind to the best opportunities.
Totally.
So a minute ago you mentioned Boris Johnson, and I think my fun question is, what was it like, Boris Johnson working for you? What was that experience like?
Incredible talent.
Yeah.
You're talking about yourself?
Boris.
Oh.
Always. He was
Johnson.
always
Boris Johnson.
Yes,
Oh,
he
okay.
always
Fair play.
late with his filing his piece. But when it did come,
Very good.
it was beautifully constructed, beautifully written.
Yeah, he's unbelievable with words,
yeah.
to be fair.
Yeah. I mean, look, John Humphreys was the opposite. Yeah, beautifully written, but always on time. And super smart because he decided not to take money, but to take equity, which was a smart move by John Humphreys at the time. But it was an absolute pleasure to build a business. I always say, look, you've got to get lucky. Any entrepreneur says to you that they designed everything and everything worked exactly as per their plan. They're either naive or they're lying to you, right? You need lady luck to smile on you.
Well, let's figure out if you're naive or lying to us then, Nadhim. What was it like working for Boris Johnson?
A privilege. I'll tell you for why.
Yeah. Naive.
When Boris made me the business minister, he gave me a great break because I was in the business department, the department I'm probably most comfortable working in because of my background. We were making preparations for Brexit. I had to sell British steel because it had collapsed, looking after everything from nuclear to life science to aero, auto, across the board was an amazing break. He then made me vaccine deployment minister, which was really my big break to demonstrate to the nation and to my colleagues in government that I can actually run things. Promoted me into cabinet as Secretary of State for Education, and then made me his Chancellor of the Exchequer. The theme in the book is there are no superhumans in politics, as there are no superhumans in business, right? Everybody makes mistakes, as long as you own those mistakes. With Boris, on vaccine, I can only speak from my own experience, right? You can only judge people. If I was asking you about someone you've worked with, you'll say, look, I don't know what they were like working in XYZ company, but when they worked with me, here's what I learned and here's what we did together. And so when he picked up the phone and said, I want you to be my beaver, bro. I want you to run the vaccine. The nation needs you. And I said, Boris, I'll take the job, of course. By the way, I got a text message when I was announced from a very close friend of mine saying, do not take the job. This is a poison chalice. This will ruin you, right? This will not go well. And you will forever be remembered as failing to vaccinate the nation, protect the nation. I'm glad I did take the job. But I had one condition on the phone when he called me. And I said, Boris, I will only do this
if we have a party at yours.
No, quite the opposite. I said, I'll only do this if I can speak with your authority. And he said, what does that mean? And I said, I've got to be able to access you in minutes, hours, not in days and weeks. I'm going to be moving so fast, making decisions so fast, right? To say we were locked down, right? I need to be able to speak with your authority and therefore get access to you. And he was good to his word. Every evening at about 11 o'clock, my phone would go and the Prime Minister would be on the phone and we'd run through what we want to do the next day in the meeting with the team, what I needed from him. And he was good to his word. Absolutely brilliant at decision making. When we were faced with war on our continent, right? I was in the cabinet, sitting 2 seats away from him, when we had the military briefing that Vladimir Zelensky would have at best a fortnight, at worst 3 days, and he'll be dead because Putin was going to roll him, according to all the analysis that we had done and intelligence that we had. And Boris banged the table and said, we put everything in now. Doesn't matter if the guy's got 3 days and we've got to take his carcass out of the country, but we're going to try everything we can to stop Putin from this aggression. It's why I say he's the most consequential prime minister of his generation. So, on a sort of serious point, you can only judge people of the way they responded to you when you work with them, and when you would make the call to say, I need this decision made. He made those brave decisions, and I think that history will judge him well on those things.
What's it been like working for so many prime ministers? Just the revolving door. Just never seen anything like it.
Yeah, I languished on the back. So for the first, I think, 7 or 8 years of my career, I never got promoted. All of my friends, all of my intake, it's a bit like uni, right? You come in together. People like Sajid Javid and others, right? Priti Patel, they all sort of went straight through, PPS, junior ministerial role, Minister of State into cabinet. And I'm sitting there going, what have I done wrong here? Right? And I couldn't get promoted. And then...
Can I just ask, do you think a part of that was your success and wealth?
So actually, what was interesting was
Farage
said to me, because he's successful and is wealthy,
True.
he said, Nadhim, because he worked at Deutsche, big institution, before entering politics, he said, you got to get better at managing up. And he was right, because I'd always been an entrepreneur. I'd been a CEO, right? Yeah. And I managed other people, and they sort of managed up towards me, right? And I think I built teams really well. And I guess I just felt that in politics, if I apply the same principles as in business, i.e. do my job well, build a small team that really looks after my constituents really, really well, right? And then demonstrate that I can do well on things like the business committee, where I interrogate Paula Venables over the post office stuff, then people will notice, right? And they'll say, right, let's give him a chance. But it doesn't work that way. You had to sort of almost find a patron. Sajid attached himself to George Osborne very quickly, and then that helped him rise through the ranks. And I guess sometimes if you haven't worked for a very large organization, it's more challenging.
Do you think part of your ability to therefore finally get that break actually was a coincidence that you'd worked with Boris in the past?
Possibly.
Yeah.
And I think
he's just at least able to see through the fact that the narrative of, well, if you're wealthy, it's difficult. It's like, you need the best man for the job, and I've got good experience working with you.
So I think it was, I was told that it was his then chief of staff who said to him, actually, I think, the best person to do this job would be Nadhim, because we need someone with business experience, and that can sort of try and really take this vaccine deployment program and pull it together. Because what we had to do was pull the supply chain side, right, and the deployment.
Yep.
So make sure that we're getting the vaccines in on time. We had Pfizer. And of course AstraZeneca. AstraZeneca was 80% being manufactured in the UK. Pfizer, we were relying on manufacturing in Belgium. And then we had to make sure, as any business would, right, is you got to work out that your constraint is supply in this case, right? If we had no constraint on supply, I'd build a much bigger infrastructure on the deployment side. But it didn't. There was no point, building an even bigger infrastructure if I don't have the supply. So, that was my big break.
Can you tell us a little bit about the first 24 hours of COVID? What was that like? Because obviously we all saw it from our homes and the chaos, but being on the inside, what was that actually like?
I talk a little bit about that in the book. So I was then the junior minister in the business department. And I was pulled into a Cobra meeting, which was going to be a run through of how the nation would and what we would need to do.
Are you feeling excited or fearful in this moment?
At this moment, I was almost before entering the Cobra. I really sort of was just doing my job. It was one of several things I had to do that day, and it just said, we're going to do a run through of what would happen in the case of it was an influenza virus in this case. And so I walked in as the representative of the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Department, and other ministers were in the room, and it was led by Matt Hancock and by Simon Stevens, who was Chief Executive of the NHS, and Chris Whitty. And the moment we went live, you had to sort of stop anything to do with the real world and pretend that actually we are now in the world of a virus that has taken over the country and is spreading and killing people, and that we're, the estimates are there'll be 500,000 people dead, and having to sort of think about, okay, who makes a decision as to who to treat in hospital, and we very quickly decided that it would be the clinicians who would have to. It can't be a politician making those trade-offs. What do we do about morgues? Do we build morgues in Hyde Park and the other parks? It was that sort of thing. What do you do about nuclear facilities? In my case, as the energy minister, what do you do about the markets? Do you shut down the markets? It was literally having to go through what each department would do. Same for the Minister of Transport, Minister of Defence, and so on. And I walked out of that meeting thinking, God, I wish this would never happen.
Yeah.
Little did I know that actually the Department of Health was already had an earlier
already briefed.
Several meetings.
Yeah.
But
was everyone terrified?
So the next meeting was when we had to make the decision on the first lockdown, and I remember walking out of 70 Whitehall and heading towards Parliament Square, and just looking around me. I don't know whether you guys remember, there's a sort of a series called The Day of the Triffids on television many decades ago. You won't remember it. Anyway,
my dad made me watch that.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was literally just looking around, and I called my wife to say, we're about to lock the nation down. And I was looking at thousands of people, right, walking into down the steps into Westminster tube station. And that is when I was really frightened. I thought, how are we going to tell these people, right, in the next 24 hours, we're going to change their life completely? And the other bit was no one really knew whether we'd all survive, right? I mean, you then start thinking about, your family, your kids, what's going to happen next? Are we all going to, will sort of aliens come into this place and think, well, this is how they lived until the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
So they were the really frightening moments. The other moment was when I was made vaccine minister.
Yeah.
Where I was one of the few people, obviously, who could travel around the country because I had to. So I turned my ground floor in my home as my office, and then I had to go to obviously NHS headquarters, number 10, Department of Health. And I walked down Piccadilly one evening, and heading to one of the meetings in Whitehall, and there was no one there. I walked in the middle of the road, right, and there wasn't even a police car.
Ghost town.
Everything was boarded up or
like
closed
from a
down.
movie.
28 days later.
Yes.
Oh, literally,
That's what I'm thinking.
28 days. I was about to say 28 days. I was looking around thinking, is this the end?
Yeah.
Right? Is this where, as I say, a new life form will come down and go, actually, this is where they lived.
Can I ask, you mentioned about, risks and being a founder and CEO, decisions and how you make decisions. That is the most critical part. And like you said earlier, don't mess around with the small ones, the noise, figure out the really important key ones. And I suppose also the hierarchy of how those decisions are made. In a room like you were in, that you just described, where you have to make a decision about we're going to do a lockdown. Can you just explain to us, how does a decision like that get made? Is it Boris up? Are you taking a vote together? Is everyone pitching in? Is there time for that? Like, I'd love to literally know, we've got boardroom experience, but what is the experience of that? An actual decision that affects the entire country. How is it made and how quickly?
The important bits of government is we can pull in experts and data, right? And everybody's view around the table was we have to listen to Chris Whitty, right, the chief medical officer, and they present first, and then the virologists will talk to us about what they think they know about the virus from their opposite numbers in China and in Europe, and we then question the data, question the presentation, and then come to a decision at the end, which usually the Prime Minister or the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, so who runs the Cabinet Office. I was CDL for a while under Liz, might chair this. So I chaired all the Cobra meetings, bar the first one for the funeral for Her Majesty. So we'd have a Cobra meeting every afternoon with every cabinet minister around the table, and we go through. It was like organising the Olympics in 11 days, basically.
That's crazy.
And then you'd make a decision. You say, look, the first lockdown was actually, in many ways, probably the easiest decision because no one knew, right, how lethal this virus is.
Yeah, and this is risk reward.
Right, and we had no vaccine and no protection against it. And therefore, it would be completely irresponsible to just say, hey, let's do nothing on this and see where we land. And then, once we got to a place where, we knew a little bit more about it, the biggest concern or the determinant of decision is at which point does the NHS break? Right. And one of the things you have to sort of worry about is, okay, if we don't try and slow it down, will the NHS break? And then obviously cause many more deaths. But then as we got into our stride and scaled the vaccination program, it certainly for me, it became an easy decision to push back and say, we don't need another lockdown. Because if you look at all the real world outcomes versus the modelling at every stage from the beginning of the pandemic, actually where the real world outcome ended up was in the most optimistic part of the model rather than the most pessimistic. And therefore, now that we've vaccinated the nation pretty much, and people have obviously been infected naturally, we didn't need to go any harder, because actually if you believe the models, right, why should the next model be much worse than the ones in terms of real world outcome?
But coming back to the question in the room, is it Chris Whitty? Is it Boris?
No, it goes back to the Prime Minister, or
so Boris still has to make the final
the lead
decision.
minister in the room.
Yeah.
Who will then say, look, obviously now we've heard from everyone. Here's the recommendation. So what happens is the civil service do a lot of work beforehand.
Yep.
So you've got a lot of papers in front of you with different options.
Yep.
And then you debate those options, and then you arrive at an outcome as to which option you're all comfortable going with.
What did you guys think of Sweden and their policy? Like, it's just the opposite approach. It's fascinating, right?
So yeah, and actually, if you look at what happened with Omicron, right, where when we took the decision not to lock down and say, actually, we're going to warn people to be careful in terms of visiting elderly during the holiday period and so on, people then self-regulated. Plus, we had the confidence that the vaccine program has pretty much delivered what it needs to deliver. And back to what I was just saying to you, my argument in Cabinet for that particular is to say, actually, if you look at the modelling versus real-world outcomes, at every stage historically, right, we've come out of the best, at the sort of the most optimistic range of the model, and therefore, why should it be any different this time? Right? And therefore, if the NHS is not going to break, and we are the most optimistic end of the model for Omicron, yes, it's more infectious, but it's much less lethal, then we shouldn't lock down.
There, obviously, like, I think in hindsight, there are so many mistakes or things people would have done differently. But I think from a perception point of view, the number 10 parties and the Matt Hancock story as a whole, I think will probably go down as two things that damaged public perception of government.
I think that's right.
And politics, probably for generations. What's your take on those two things? How much is that? How much was that in the wrong? I suppose.
I think that's right. I think that no doubt the what took place in number 10 was wrong.
Was it a good party though?
What's that?
Was it a good party?
I was never at any of those events. Interesting enough, by the way, none of my team were.
Which is such comments that I can't believe anyone.
Any of those, and actually, it was painful.
Yeah.
For the team, for the vaccine deployment team, for the vaccine procurement
Well, that's
team
probably it, right? Like,
to
you
say,
probably feel like your
we were working,
reputation's
we were
damaged,
working, and we were working 15, 19-hour days.
And you did the good part
right?
that everyone respected.
And we did the good part.
Yeah.
And you sort of think, how can this happen?
Yeah.
And so that was, I think, deeply damaging. I think the issue around the perception around PPE, that you know, I don't think, you know, people like Matt Hancock were in any way you know, meaning for it to go wrong, but I think the perception of abuse because of the lack of controls around the procurement, because of what I said to you, you know, we should have brought in. They did later on, by the way. I remember they brought in Lord Dayton, who then onshored a lot of the vaccine, a lot of the PPE production, in a really, you know, professional way, and that it tells you everything about. You know, if there's a lesson to learn, and it's in the book, is the more we can work together, you know, private and public sector, we can do great things.
And cross-party.
If we take away some of the sort of yaboo politics, right? I remember very early on, Kate Bingham was really hurt. She was very close to me, right? A close friend. Her husband is a close friend. And she's in the middle of trying to work out, right, how to you know, due diligence these teams, get the right contracts in place quickly, right? And she was like 6 months ahead of Europe, by the way. You know, we signed up, and they hadn't even begun negotiating in Europe with what ended up to be the most successful teams in vaccine manufacturing. In the middle of all this, she's being attacked by the Labour Party, you know, at the dispatch box, because, you know, where does this, you know, woman come from? And, you know, she must be a crony because her husband is Jesse Norman, is a member of Parliament. She's doing it for free, right? She was giving her time and effort, you know, 19-hour days for her country, and she was being attacked and briefed against. Some of it was coming internally as well, that, she'd hired a PR person to try and communicate actually how she's doing her job in terms of optioning which vaccine to go with. That, I think, was probably the worst bits of the, you know, the crisis, the challenge for the country. The best bits, by the way, is I decided when I became vaccine minister to brief MPs every Friday, right, on Zoom, and in the first few weeks,
smart business thinking,
right, we had 600 MPs on the call, and I would open by saying, I'm going to share data with you that will be public probably in the next 48 hours, but at the moment it's private. And I've got with me 2 leaders from the NHS who can answer your questions, right, and from vaccine deployment. And we would answer all their questions. Why? Because one, they're my conduit to the nation, right? They are the representatives of their constituents, right? And they will go out and hopefully take the message that we knew what we're doing. We've got a plan. They can ask any question. How are we prioritizing who gets the vaccine first? You know, how are we allocating vaccine stocks around the country? All of that. And no one played games. Literally, everybody behaved well. No one tried to brief or leak or do anything bad.
You've talked so well about your business success and having failures, and the YouGov story obviously as well. It's like this, right? It's waves. It's like sometimes it's incredible, and then there's troughs and all of the things because you're a normal entrepreneur, and that's the game. Right now, you know, you've led the Conservative Party for a long time. You know, you were there as like from junior to chairman, right? So you've done all the roles,
back
and
to
all the things.
foot soldier.
Exactly, back to foot soldier. And right now, it's fair to say it's at a real low point, right? Like, reform is killing it compared to the Tories, and it feels like most centrist-ish people who would have normally voted Tory are voting reform. It's a real shift. It feels that way anyway. And the polls are saying it true, so that's obviously your area of expertise. Knowing what you know in business, where do the Tories go from here? How do they turn this around? How do they turn this trough into the next opportunity and save the party?
So the first thing you got to do is learn from your mistakes, right? If you remember, at the end of the last government, we got to such a painful, bizarre place where some of my colleagues would go on television and be proud to talk about, you know, the 5 families meeting in a smoke-filled room at midnight. I exaggerate to make a point. Yep. But just imagine what your listeners, what TV viewers would be thinking when they're just trying to pay the mortgage for that month, or their bills, or make sure their kids are safe at, and doing well at school, when they see their governing party, right, the party that has governed this country for 80% of the last century, last 100 years, right, talk about itself as if it's an episode of Sopranos, right? We formed a circular firing squad, right? The footballing analogy works here, i.e., and people say to me about the book, why did you back Boris on this? I just think, look, politics is a team game, right? When you put the jersey on, you got to do your best on the pitch, right? Now, there may be problems in the dressing room, there may be issues, but you don't take them out in public. So the first thing we've got to do is unite, right? And I'm looking for the candidate that can demonstrate to me how they can unite the party. Because if we don't, far more disciplined parties than ours will fill that void, right? You're seeing it in Germany with the AfD and others, right? Labour, I think, are making mistakes disappointingly. I think, walking away from a deterrent against the illegal crossings, right? Legal migration we can talk about, and I think we need to have almost a cross-party, a bit like what we did on vaccine, debate as to what level of migration do we want, who do we want to allow to come to our shores legally, but also have some safe routes for asylum seekers, people who flee persecution like my family did. But before we do any of that, we've got to be disciplined and come back together and demonstrate to the nation that we're serious about governing. Right? We became completely unserious at the end, and the nation was right to punish us for that. And I think Rishi clearly got to a stage where he realised, my view is that this party is becoming ungovernable, and he had to go to the country.
It felt like kamikaze move, didn't
What
it?
do you
knowledgeably?
What do you think of Nigel Farage at the moment? Like, what's your view of the movement that they have?
So I think, look, what Nigel Farage and Reform are tapping into.
By the way, talk about consequential politicians, like him or not. He'd be up there. He'd be up there competing with Boris.
I don't disagree with you. And they're tapping into a deep frustration. And people say to me, you talk about refugees and immigrants, and that we should, when we get into the back of an Uber or see people who are sort of polishing the wards in our hospitals, just remember that they probably fled lives that are probably much better than what they're having to put up with now to get to make ends meet. But I think even immigrant families are upset by the queue jumping, or people who are perceived to be breaking the law to come to these shores, also putting their lives at risk, right? And these gangs making money out of these crossings. Now, if you look at that, that's about 40,000 of the net migration numbers. The big number is the legal migration, which is running at about 700,000 a year at the moment, right?
Which is like 10x over a decade or something, right? It's just
right.
unsustainable.
And can our public services really sustain that level of migration? We need to have a debate about this, right? I quite like the idea that Robert Jenrick is saying, look, let's have a parliamentary vote as to, what quotas of migration do we think we need and why? And this is the sort of smart stuff that, Singapore and the UAE and other guys are doing, is working out actually how do we attract the best talent, and of course have safe and legal routes for those fleeing persecution. Because what we seem to be doing at the moment is we are importing low-skilled labor, right? Which on the face of it looks like it's driving GDP growth, but actually when you look at GDP per capita, it's doing the opposite, right? It's making us poorer, not richer. And we are exporting talent, right? I think we're second only to China of losing millionaires.
And on a GDP basis, or per capita basis rather, we're number one. We're over China.
So my fear, right? And I know, look, some people listening to this, or some people who attack me on social media will say, of course, your wealth is not the only proxy for talent, right? But it's a pretty good one, right? In terms of
It's
wealth
also
creation.
aspiration.
Right.
Like, we need to be a country that aspires for that. That's where the US really gets it and the UK doesn't. We criticize the idea of accumulating wealth, but if you accumulate wealth, you can distribute the wealth as well, and you can help society and be a philanthropist and all the great things that people quite often do in good Western societies.
Put this man in parliament.
It's so frustrating.
Maybe that's what we'll do next.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating.
That's our official get out.
Yeah. Nadhim,
Yeah.
it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming in
really
and talking
enjoyed
to
it.
us and
Thank you
helping
for
us
having
solve the world's problems together.
Thank you very
for
much.
having me. Genuinely.